My name is Scarlett Hayes, and I'm 28 years old. When I was 18, my mother Eleanor slapped me across the face and told me I was worthless for choosing Stanford over the family business. It happened in the office above our cotton gin. I still had the acceptance letter in my hand when she ripped it away and crushed it into her fist. "You think you're walking out of here to play with computers?" she hissed. "You're not going anywhere. This plantation is your life." I got a full ride. I said, "I can build something that doesn't live and die on crop prices. I don't want to spend my life arguing over irrigation schedules." Her hand moved so fast I didn't even see it. Just felt the sting and heard the crack. My cheek burned, my ears rang, and for a second the whole room went quiet. "You are ungrateful and useless," she said low and cold. "If you walk out that door, don't you dare come back. You are no daughter of mine." Behind her, my stepfather Robert watched without saying a word. My brother Mason stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. I picked up my backpack, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and walked out of the office into the heat of the yard. 10 years later, I would step off my own plane just beyond those trees, and every one of them would look at me like they had seen a ghost. A few hours later, the weight of what had happened settled over me like dust that refused to be brushed off. I kept moving because stopping meant admitting I had nowhere to go. The road stretched ahead without direction, and the only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay near the plantation. Every familiar face would ask questions I couldn't answer. So the safest choice was distance. I headed toward town carrying nothing but a half-packed backpack and a fading sense of certainty. The first night had no plan. I sat outside a grocery store until the sky went dark, pretending I was waiting for someone. When the cold began to creep into my sleeves, I scrolled through my phone again and again until I finally sent a message to the only person who might understand. Her family had always been steady in a way mine never was, and I hoped they still felt the same about me. When they opened their door a short while later, the relief almost knocked the air out of my chest. They didn't ask for explanations. They didn't push me to talk. They simply made space. And for that moment, it was enough. Staying in their spare room wasn't meant to last, and I knew it. I needed to figure out how to create a life that didn't crumble the moment someone closed a door on me. The next morning, I walked through town searching for any place that would hire someone without experience or references. The diner near the highway took me for a late shift clearing dishes. A few blocks away, a small cleaning company added me to their night rotation. The work wasn't complicated, but the hours blurred into each other until days felt like a long stretch of noise and exhaustion. I spent nights wiping down counters until my hands ached, then dragged heavy trash bags across empty parking lots under flickering streetlights. I learned the rhythm of surviving without anyone to fall back on. The letter from Stanford stayed folded in my backpack like something fragile I was afraid to touch. I wasn't ready to accept that my chance had slipped through my fingers because of a single decision made by someone else. Every break I had, I checked the requirements again, hoping the answer would somehow change. It never did. Without the tax forms that only Eleanor had, the scholarship couldn't be released. I called offices, emailed departments, and tried to find loopholes, but all roads circled back to the same wall. There was no arguing with a system that needed documents I no longer had access to. When the reality finally sank in, the disappointment spread deeper than I expected. The dream I had chased for years had been stopped by a barrier I couldn't control. But giving up wasn't an option. I searched for something within reach and found the community college in Lubbock offering programs that didn't need the same paperwork. It wasn't the path I wanted, but it was a path. And that was enough to keep me from collapsing into anger. I used most of my savings to put down the first month of rent for a small studio near the edge of town. The place smelled faintly of damp wood, and the heater rattled every time it turned on, but it was mine. The nights were quiet in a way that made me confront every thought I had pushed aside. I lay awake listening to cars passing on the road outside, wondering how long it would take before I stopped feeling like I was one step away from falling apart. Classes began soon after I settled in. The campus wasn't large, but it offered a structure my life desperately needed. Having a schedule, a desk to sit at, and assignments to complete gave me a sense of direction. Between shifts at the diner and cleaning jobs, I carried my laptop everywhere, working on small coding exercises whenever I found a spare moment. The routines didn't erase the uncertainty, but they helped me endure it. Even on days when everything felt heavy, I reminded myself that moving forward even slowly was better than standing still. I didn't know what the future would become. All I had was a small room, a stack of textbooks, and the quiet conviction that I wasn't done yet. And for the moment, that was enough to keep going. As the weeks passed, the routines I built began shaping the version of myself I didn't realize I was becoming. The exhaustion never eased, but there was something strangely grounding about having every hour accounted for. Morning classes, afternoon study, evening shifts, and late night cleaning. None of it felt glamorous yet, each piece held my life together in a way I desperately needed. The community college library became my favorite place to breathe. It was quiet enough that I could focus without the noise of the diner or the echo of empty hallways. I spread my textbooks across the table, determined to absorb everything I could. Even on days when my eyelids felt heavy, I forced myself to stay. The work wasn't easy, but difficulty no longer scared me, falling backward did. One afternoon, while working through an assignment, I noticed a woman at a nearby table tapping her pen rhythmically against a notebook. Her focus was sharp, and the confidence in her expression made her stand out. It wasn't admiration that made me look twice. It was the unexpected reassurance that someone in this building seemed to take the same things seriously I did. When she closed her laptop and walked out, the energy she carried lingered in the space she left behind, and I found myself wanting to keep up with that standard. The campus gradually pulled me in through small interactions. A professor who left extra notes on the whiteboard. A student who offered a study guide without expecting anything back. Even casual acknowledgments made me realize I wasn't invisible here. It was strange learning how to exist in a world where no one expected me to sacrifice my ambitions to maintain a family image. Surviving for myself instead of someone else was new territory. Outside of school, the demands of working long hours never stopped. My hands developed small cuts from scrubbing metal counters, and the muscles in my back tightened from lifting boxes. Each shift reminded me how fragile security could be. Yet it also taught me resilience I had never experienced on the plantation. No one criticized the way I stacked plates or mopped floors. No one monitored my movements with the expectation that I would inherit a burden I didn't choose. The simplicity of being judged only by effort, not lineage, was liberating. Despite the progress, there were nights when doubt crept in. I sometimes wondered whether I had misunderstood my own abilities, whether the person who believed she belonged at Stanford had misjudged her place. The thought usually came when I was sitting alone in my studio, the hum of the heater filling the silence. But even on those nights when it felt like everything I worked for was miles beyond reach, I opened my laptop and forced myself to keep learning. I couldn't afford the luxury of stopping. During one of those late nights, I discovered a club on campus focused on technology and engineering projects. Their online page listed competitions, group activities, and events I knew I couldn't attend because of my work schedule. It stung, realizing how much I had to give up just to stay afloat. But instead of letting the disappointment settle, I created a small folder on my desktop and filled it with project ideas I wanted to attempt alone. If I couldn't join a team, I would become my own. A few weeks later, I saved enough to replace my aging laptop battery. It wasn't much, but the improvement felt like replacing a failing part of myself. I sat in the library afterwards, scrolling through online tutorials and coding challenges, trying to build something that made me feel capable again. Every solved problem felt like reclaiming ground I had lost the day I walked away from the plantation. The more I worked, the clearer it became that I needed guidance to push further. Community college offered what it could, but I needed someone with experience who could point me toward opportunities I didn't know existed. When a professor commented on my project submission one day, leaving a detailed note about how I had approached the assignment, something shifted. The feedback wasn't merely academic. It was recognition. It was proof that the work I did alone at night mattered to someone else. Weeks turned into months, and the patterns that once felt temporary began solidifying into a life I could almost trust. The ache from what happened at the plantation dulled. Not because it stopped hurting, but because every small achievement built a layer of separation between me and the version of myself who once believed her future depended on someone else's approval. I didn't fully grasp it then, but everything I was slowly assembling piece by piece, shift by shift, was preparing me for something I never imagined would become possible. By the time another semester rolled in, the pace of my life had settled into something sharp and disciplined. I had stopped waiting for things to get easier. Instead, I learned to operate within the chaos. Early mornings became second nature, and the fatigue that once dragged me down transformed into a quiet companion I carried everywhere. It wasn't pleasant, but it reminded me why I kept pushing forward. One afternoon, while heading toward the science wing, I noticed a bulletin board filled with flyers for academic challenges and innovation programs. Most students walked past without paying attention, but I stopped long enough to scan each sheet of paper. The competitions weren't just about winning, they were stepping stones into the world I had spent years trying to reach. The deadlines were tight, the expectations high, but I felt a spark that cut through the monotony of my routine. I wasn't sure if I had the time or skill to participate, yet something inside me whispered that I needed to try. Over the next few days, I rearranged everything around the idea of entering one of those challenges. I reduced the hours of a cleaning shift, picked up more efficient study habits, and pushed myself to work faster without letting the quality slip. The structure of the competition demanded a concept, a prototype, and a written breakdown of how it could help realities. It was ambitious for someone juggling two jobs, but ambition was the one thing in my life no one could take. I spent nights hunched over my desk in the studio, surrounded by notebooks and half-finished ideas. The heater hummed in the background while I scribbled through diagrams, crossed them out, rewrote them, then started again. Progress came slowly, but each adjustment pulled the project closer to something coherent. The more I built, the clearer it became that I wasn't chasing the approval I'd once begged for. I was proving to myself that leaving the plantation hadn't emptied me of potential. Working alone had its limits. I understood that I needed someone who thought differently than I did, someone who could approach problems from angles I missed. The woman I had noticed in the library weeks earlier came to mind more often than I expected. Her confidence, the way she dissected assignments, the precision she carried. Those observations stuck with me. I began studying her work whenever I could, not out of envy, but because seeing her push herself made me want to match her intensity. Eventually, observations weren't enough. I needed guidance I couldn't get from online tutorials or late-night trial and error. When a professor offered written feedback on one of my technical submissions, I reread his comments until I understood every detail. His notes revealed blind spots I hadn't realized I had, and the clarity they brought made the project stronger. Each improvement filled me with a sense of momentum I hadn't felt since the day the Stanford letter arrived. The deeper I got into the competition requirements, the more I realized how much my life had shifted. I no longer thought about survival in the same way I did when I first left home. Back then, the goal was simply to keep moving. Now, movement had purpose, direction, and weight. When exhaustion pressed on me, I reminded myself that deadlines didn't care about the life I came from. They only cared about the work I put in. My savings were tight, but I managed to purchase a few materials to build a basic mock-up for the project. I assembled what I could with budget supplies, improvising wherever gaps appeared. The model wasn't polished, but it represented effort I once believed I wasn't capable of without institutional support. Each night, I reinforced the structure, studying how different components interacted until the concept began taking realistic form. Despite the progress, there were moments when fear crept in. The idea of failing publicly, of putting myself out there only to fall short, stirred a discomfort I tried to ignore. But fear was familiar, a distant echo of the voice that once told me I was worthless. Instead of running from it, I worked through it. Failure seemed less frightening than staying stagnant. By the time the submission window opened, my project wasn't perfect, but it carried every ounce of determination I had. I uploaded the files, attached the documentation, and hit submit with hands that trembled from more than fatigue. I didn't know whether I'd make it past the first round, but the act of trying felt like a victory on its own. I didn't realize it then, but this step, This quiet decision made in a small, dim studio would eventually push my life into a direction I never believed possible. The announcement email arrived on a quiet morning when I wasn't expecting anything beyond another long day of work and classes. I had opened my laptop with the usual heaviness in my shoulders, ready to review notes I barely remembered writing. Instead, the subject line on the screen grabbed my attention with a jolt of disbelief. My submission had moved into the next stage of the competition. For a moment, I didn't move. The world felt strangely muted, as if everything around me had paused to acknowledge this shift. I hadn't let myself imagine I would advance. I had entered with the hope of proving to myself that I could try, but seeing my name listed among the selected projects stirred something far deeper than relief. It felt like validation I had been chasing long before I realized it. The next phase required in-person demonstrations and detailed evaluations. I knew I wasn't ready, at least not the way the others would be. Most participants had access to better equipment, smoother prototypes, and more polished experience. I had a partially assembled model made from discount materials and countless nights of trial and error. Still, the thought of backing out didn't cross my mind. I had come too far to turn away now. Preparing for the demonstration consumed every spare second of my days. I reorganized shifts again, reducing hours wherever I could, without jeopardizing rent. The diner manager wasn't thrilled, but the late-night cleaning company allowed me to pick up jobs with flexible timing, which helped me maintain the balance I needed. Juggling responsibilities became an intricate dance, where every misstep threatened to collapse the fragile structure I'd built. With each improvement to the prototype, I felt the distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming stretched wider. I no longer saw myself as the girl who had been thrown out of her home for choosing a different future. I saw someone who refused to let her life be dictated by fear or rejection. The project had become more than a competition entry. It was a reminder that my identity didn't depend on the expectations that once suffocated me. As the event approached, the campus buzzed with anticipation. Students whispered about the competitors they already viewed as fronter-runners, people with extensive backgrounds, supportive mentors, and polished presentations. I observed them from the edges of crowded study halls and hallways, absorbing their confidence, their networks, their ease. Some had teams while others had faculty backing. I had none of those things. Yet the emptiness around me didn't feel like a disadvantage anymore. It felt like a challenge I was finally prepared to face. On the day of the demonstration, I arrived early to set up my table. The hall filled with energy-bright lights, polished displays, and judges reviewing their clipboards. My project sat beside me, imperfect, but unmistakably mine. As the minutes passed, nervousness curled in my chest, but beneath it ran a current of determination. This wasn't about proving anything to the people who had dismissed me. It was about proving something to the version of myself who once doubted she could stand here at all. When my turn came, the air seemed to thicken with quiet expectation. I positioned the prototype the way I had practiced countless times. The movements around me blurred as I focused every ounce of attention on presenting my work clearly. I relied on the understanding I had built through countless nights of effort. Every flaw I had corrected, every adjustment I had made, every piece of the concept I had reshaped until it made sense. The demonstration wasn't perfect. The model flickered once, and I had to study my hands more than I wanted to admit. Yet for the first time in years, I didn't question my place in a room full of people who believed they belonged there. I felt myself standing firmly grounded by the knowledge that every step that led me here had been carved through my own persistence. After the presentation ended, I packed up my materials with a strange calm. I didn't know how the judges would respond or whether I had done enough to move forward again. But as I stepped into the hallway and felt the cool air of the building brush against me, I realized something had shifted permanently. I was no longer living a life shaped by survival alone. I was beginning to build a future I could claim with certainty. What I didn't know then was that this competition, this single event on an otherwise ordinary campus, would ignite the chain of opportunities that would eventually lead me far beyond anything I could imagine in that moment. The days following the competition felt strangely suspended, as if time had stretched itself thin, waiting for something to happen. I kept moving because stopping meant letting anxiety take root, and I didn't have the luxury of losing momentum. My shifts continued, my assignments stacked up, and the routines I had carved into my life remained steady. Still, there was a quiet hum beneath everything, an unspoken awareness that a door might be opening somewhere out of sight. That shift came unexpectedly, slipping into my life in the form of an email from one of the event coordinators. I had been sitting in the library trying to catch up on reading I had ignored while preparing for the competition when the notification appeared on my screen. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what the message might contain. My heart beat faster as I clicked, bracing for rejection disguised as encouragement. But the message wasn't a dismissal, it was an invitation. My project had caught the attention of a faculty member who recommended me for an innovation program sponsored by an engineering firm in Dallas. It wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it offered mentorship resources and the chance to develop my idea beyond the limitations of my studio apartment and tight budget. The opportunity felt unreal, as if I had stumbled into a version of my life I wasn't sure I deserved yet. Agreeing to join the program meant one thing: I had to rebuild my life again, this time around a new goal. I rearranged schedules, trimmed unnecessary expenses, and carved out time to travel between the campus and the program's office. The commute was long and the nights were even longer, but each step forward tightened my grip on the future I had been trying to reach. The first time I walked into the firm's workspace, I felt a rush of nerves. The environment buzzed with focused energy, whiteboards filled with sketches, open computers streaming lines of data, and people who carried themselves with the confidence of those certain of their purpose. Standing among them felt surreal. I wasn't sure if I belonged, but I knew I wanted to earn my place here. The program paired me with a mentor who reviewed my concept with a sharp, analytical eye. His feedback came in the form of annotated files, diagrams, and suggestions layered with precision. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I absorbed everything. I spent nights studying his notes, turning them over repeatedly until they made sense. For the first time, I had access to guidance that pushed me beyond what I could achieve alone. The more I worked, the more the project evolved. What began as a rough idea built from discounted materials transformed into a structured design with clear potential. Each improvement felt like peeling away another layer of doubt that had clung to me since the day I walked away from the plantation. Little by little, I felt myself shedding the weight of the past and stepping into a life defined by deliberate choices, not forced obligations. Some nights, exhaustion pressed heavily against my ribs, but the strain no longer felt empty. It carried purpose, and anchor, reminding me of how far I had come. The more progress I made, the more I understood how much I had been shaped by the struggles I once resented. They had carved resilience into my bones, sharpened my instincts, and turned me into someone who didn't crumble under pressure. As the months went on, my responsibilities grew. The program introduced networking events, project reviews, and workshops that exposed me to people building careers I once only read about. Walking through those rooms felt like entering a world that had always existed but had never felt accessible. I studied how people presented themselves, how they explained their ideas, how they carried confidence without arrogance. Every observation became another tool I tucked away for later. The program wasn't just building a project, it was building me. The turning point came during a late-night session at the firm. The office lights were dim and most desks sat empty. I stayed behind to finish refining a section of the design when I realized I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I wasn't standing on borrowed ground. I wasn't pretending. I was contributing. I was growing. I was learning how to stand in spaces I once believed were beyond reach. Looking back, it was in those quiet hours surrounded by the hum of machines and the glow of my laptop screen that I understood something important. I wasn't simply trying to escape my past. I was building a future powerful enough to eclipse it. What I couldn't foresee was how quickly that future would accelerate, and how the next opportunity would propel me far beyond anything I had imagined. The next shift in my life arrived with a seriousness that made everything before it feel like preparation for a moment I couldn't avoid. My work at the program had grown into something larger than I anticipated, and one afternoon I received an offer that reshaped the course of my future. A startup in Austin reached out after reviewing one of the projects I had contributed to, offering a position that carried both responsibility and the chance to expand my skills far beyond the limits of the program. The opportunity felt almost unreal, yet something inside me knew I had been moving toward it for years without realizing it. Accepting the position meant uprooting my routines once again. I packed my belongings with a calmness that surprised me, folding away the reminders of long nights spent building a new life from nothing. The transition to Austin came with challenges, but they were the kind I had learned to navigate new environments, new expectations, and the unspoken pressure to prove I belonged. The city carried a pace that pushed me to keep growing, and each step forward made me feel more grounded in the identity I had been shaping since the day I left home. What began as an entry-level role evolved quickly. I spent late nights at my desk refining concepts, learning from people who had carved out their place in the industry through years of relentless work. I absorbed everything: their strategies, their problem-solving instincts, their ability to adapt. Each experience added another layer of confidence I didn't realize I was missing. I wasn't just surviving opportunities anymore. I was shaping them. As the months turned into years, the company expanded and I found myself stepping into leadership roles. My ideas were taken seriously. My projects earned recognition, and the quiet determination I once carried in solitude became a force I could see reflected in the work I produced. Eventually, an investment group approached me with the possibility of launching a company of my own, something innovative, something demanding, something that aligned with everything I had been building. I said yes. Building a company required focus I didn't know I still possessed. The long hours returned. The uncertainty settled in again. But the difference this time was that I wasn't building out of desperation. I was building with purpose. The company grew. Investors joined. Deals formed. And over time, the success that once felt out of reach became part of my reality. When the opportunity came to purchase a small plane for business travel, I hesitated only long enough to recognize what it symbolized: mobility, independence, and the quiet affirmation that I had stepped fully into the life I once believed was closed to me. That chapter of growth carried me back to the past in an unexpected way. One morning, an email arrived from a financial consultant requesting a meeting about a struggling agricultural operation in West Texas. The name of the farm pulled me into a stillness I hadn't felt in years. It was the same place I had left behind, the same business I had been told I was ungrateful for walking away from. Their debt had climbed beyond anything sustainable. Their production numbers had fallen. The operation risked shutting down. I sat with the information for a long time before deciding what to do. The weight of my history with that land pressed on me, but anger wasn't what surfaced. What rose instead was clarity. I had no obligation to rescue the people who had pushed me out. But I understood the consequences their downfall would bring to the workers who relied on the farm to survive. Saving the place didn't mean saving them. When I finally returned, my plane touched down on a small strip near the property. Standing on the soil I once walked as a teenager, I felt no longing, no fear, nostalgia, only distance. Eleanor and Robert approached with expressions tangled between shock and desperation. The years had changed them. Lines etched deeper tensions carved into their posture, but nothing in me moved toward forgiveness. The negotiations were direct. I reviewed the records, examined the debts, and purchased the land and facilities through a holding company under my name. The employees remained. The cotton gin continued. But Eleanor and Robert lost ownership completely. Their choices had consequences that arrived without ceremony. Walking through the fields afterward, I understood the finality of the moment. I no longer needed closure from them. I didn't need recognition or reconciliation. The success I built carried enough weight to stand on its own. What mattered most was the truth I had learned across every step of my life. Breaking away from the expectations that tried to define me was the first step toward becoming the person I needed to be. Pain had shaped me, but resilience had carried me. And standing there facing a future unbound from the past, I realized the lesson fully. Some doors close violently, but the life you build after walking through them can be stronger than anything left behind. There is something universally chilling about the sound of a closing door, especially when it is slammed shut by the very people who were supposed to keep it open for you. Scarlett's story isn't just about the stunning visual of a private plane landing on a dirt airstrip. It is about the 10 agonizing silent years that happened between the slap and the landing. We often glorify the success part of these stories, the big company, the buyout, the vindication. But the real victory wasn't the day Scarlett bought the plantation. The real victory was the first night she spent sleeping outside a grocery store and didn't turn back. It was the thousands of nights she spent scrubbing counters and studying in a cold studio apartment, refusing to let Eleanor's words define her worth. Eleanor and Robert believed that by cutting Scarlett off, they were teaching her a lesson about the real world. They thought that without their land, their money, and their permission, she would wither. They didn't realize that some seeds, when buried in the dark, don't die, they grow roots. Scarlett didn't need their soil to bloom, she needed her own freedom. This story is a powerful testament to the fact that family is not a title you are born with. It is a title you earn. When Eleanor said, "You are no daughter of mine," she thought she was issuing a punishment. In reality, she was issuing a release. She freed Scarlett from the obligation of living a life that was never hers. For anyone watching who feels like the black sheep or who has been told that their dreams are ungrateful or useless, let this be your reminder. The best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you. It is building a life so full, so complete, and so undeniably yours that their opinion of you no longer matters. Scarlett returned to West Texas not to gloat, but to close a circle. She saved the workers, saved the land, but she let go of the parents who couldn't love her for who she was. That is the ultimate power move, stepping back into the place that broke you only to realize it no longer has any power over you. If Scarlett's journey sparked a fire in you, share your story in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from everything to find yourself? And tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Until next time, keep building your own wings so you never have to rely on anyone else to fly.